Good afternoon, students. Welcome back. So, let's start our first class of Indian economic development. So, name of the unit is Development Policies and Experience 1947 to 1990, and chapter that we are going to cover is Indian Economy on the Eve of Independence. Now, after reading this chapter, children, you will be in a position to acquire familiarity with the state of Indian economy on the eve of independence, that is in the year 1947 when we attained our independence, and you will be able to understand the factors that led to the underdevelopment and stagnation of Indian economy. Now, children, first of all, let me tell you, on the eve of independence, it's very important for us to know that when Britishers left us, in what state our Indian economy was, because then only we'll be able to pave way for what kind of strategies Indian government had to adopt in the post-independence scenario. So, to give you a background, first of all, children, India had an independent economy before the advent of Britishers. That means before Britishers had come to India, it was fairly independent economy, although its nature was agrarian because majority of its population was dependent upon agriculture for its livelihood. And we can also say that there were some various kinds of manufacturing activities also took place, and particularly I would like to mention that Indian handicraft industries, they were world famous, and precious metals, precious stones, cotton and silk textiles, they were very much in demand. And but when we talk about as Britishers came in India, and the main focus of economic policies which they had pursued, its main focus was protecting and promoting their own interest. So, it was quite natural that they were not doing anything which will bring about positive changes in the Indian economy or its sectors. Now, it's before we talk about those policies, it's very important to know that those policies brought about a fundamental change in the economic structure of Indian economy. And now, let's proceed and see. It's very important to children, if we want to know about the state of an economy, we try to gauge it through its GDP or its national income or per capita income. But since British government had no such interest to bring about any development in India, because their policies were focused on promotion of British interest, hence they did not make any sincere attempts to measure national income of the country. So, some of the indigenous economists only, they made some attempts in the beginning to measure national income. So, I would particularly like to mention Dadabhai Naoroji, William Digby, Finlay Shiras, V.K.R.V. Rao and R.C. Desai. And it was V.K.R.V. Rao's estimates of national income which were considered very significant. And commenting upon the growth rate of GDP during that particular time, especially during the first half of the 20th century, the growth of aggregate real output, it remained less than 2%, and growth in per capita income was very, very low. It was 0.5%. Now, real output and nominal output, children, I have already told you, I am also providing you with an image, and you can see why do we measure GDP or real output we measure. When we measure real output, then basically we are attempting to calculate GDP at constant prices and not current prices, because sometimes what happens, the physical output does not increase that much, but only because prices increase significantly. बहुत ज़्यादा इंक्रीज प्राइसेस में आ जाता है, लेकिन आउटपुट में, फिजिकल आउटपुट में इंक्रीज नहीं आता. लेकिन अगर आप जीडीपी को करंट प्राइस पे यानी उसी ईयर के प्राइस पे मेजर करते हो, तो जो भी इंक्रीज आता है वो बेसिकली प्राइस के बढ़ने की वजह से आता है. So which actually in a way overestimates our GDP, because we do not get the real picture. That is why we always calculate GDP at real prices, sorry, real GDP we calculate, and that is calculated constant prices. That means we do not allow prices to change. तो बेस ईयर प्राइस पे ही हम उसको कैलकुलेट करते हैं. बेस ईयर प्राइस पे कैलकुलेट करने से क्या होता है कि अगर आउटपुट में फिजिकल टर्म्स में इंक्रीज हुआ होगा तभी जीडीपी में इंक्रीज दिखेगा. So talking about that, the growth rate of real aggregate output was very low, less than 2%. Now let's talk about agriculture sector, children. So let us see how was agriculture sector characterized, okay, at that particular time. Children, 85% of the population during that time lived in villages. So you can see what a significant proportion of the population was directly or indirectly deriving their livelihood on agriculture sector. So you can gauge how important this sector becomes for Indian economy. But during that time, if we see, this particular sector recorded very low productivity, and the word that we actually very aptly use is it was stagnated. So there was stagnation in agriculture sector. Now let's see what stagnation means. When you say you cease to grow, जब आप कहते हैं कि growth रुक जाती है तो आप stagnate करते हो, आगे नहीं बढ़ पाते हो. So let's see what were the reasons responsible for that stagnation. So first and foremost was faulty land and revenue settlement system. So when we talk about land settlement system, children, it was basically जमींदारी system which was prevalent. Now all of you are aware, आप लोगों ने लगान मूवी भी देखी है, उसमें भी आपने देखा है ना, intermediaries यानी जमींदार्स were there, और जमींदार्स की responsibility होती थी that they used to collect revenues and on behalf of British government, and then they used to deposit to British government's account. Now what was the fault in this system now? First of all, whatever profit which was actually accruing out of agriculture sector, farming, it actually went to jamidars and not to the cultivators. That was number one. Another thing was that revenue collection system also, if you see, or what do we call revenue settlement, there were faults in that also, because basically British government had appointed jamidars and they had made them responsible to collect revenues from the farmer and then deposit to the government. Now dates for depositing that revenue was also fixed. So if jamidar by any chance will fail to deposit revenue in British government's account by that time, they will tend to lose their rights. So they never wanted to lose their rights. तो वो क्या करते थे, by whatever means or forcefully they will extract revenue from the farmers and they will deposit to British government. So obviously the poor farmer only had to was exploited and had to suffer. Now coming to the next point, we can also see that lack of irrigation was also one of the factor responsible for stagnation of agriculture sector. Moreover, low levels of technology, because children, even for agriculture you do need modern machinery, but how can you expect that from a government which was only focusing on protecting and promoting their interest? Then there was a negligible use of fertilizer during that time. Now you also know, when we use fertilizer, it helps in increasing the productivity of the soil. So obviously hardly anyone was using fertilizer, or hardly it was available for them to use. Last very important point that I'm going to make is commercialization of agriculture. Now what is commercialization? When you are commercializing agriculture means that basically the production which was taking place in agriculture sector, that was geared for the market and not for self consumption. Now so when you define this term, and you can also refer to the glossary which is given at the back of the NCERT book, it will be very helpful to you. So when production of cash crops take place, so those crops basically, and Britishers what they did, they wanted that farmers should focus on growing cash crops, that means producing for the markets and not for self consumption. So they started offering higher price for cash crops. Now what was their interest in that? They knew the cash crops can be used as raw material in British industries. So that is how they actually encourage farmers to grow cash crops. Now what will happen? Farmers are having limited resources. Now obviously if they start producing more of cash crops, definitely food grain production will fall, and that is what exactly happened. So overall if we see, our agriculture sector was exploited and agriculture sector was in very bad state on the eve of independence. Now children, let's proceed to industrial sector. Now when we are talking about industrial sector, I would like to say what were the characteristics of industrial sector during that particular time. First of all, there was no sound industrial base during colonial rule. Now what is industrial base? Children, for any countries' industries to grow, it's very important that there are basic and heavy industries also. There are capital goods industries also. Because now I would like to introduce the concept of consumer goods and capital goods industries at this stage itself. Consumer goods, see, if you consume sugar, you consume paper, so for manufacturing those goods also you require machinery, you require tools. Now there are industries which manufacture tools and machinery also. Those industries are known as capital good industry. That means the industries which can produce machine tools which are in turn used for producing articles for current consumption. Now these are capital goods industries because they also, one more point is that they also require huge amount of investment or capital for setting up. Now, for example, like you talk about oil mining, steel, machinery manufacturing industries, these are examples of capital good industries or basic and heavy industries. Now, it's very important for a country not just to have consumer goods industries, rather having capital goods industries. That only makes the industrial base of a country stronger. So, no such thing was there during British rule. Now another thing we talk about is very significant thing is the systematic deindustrialization which was brought about British government. Children, the twofold motive that they had followed for systematically deindustrializing our industrial sector was, first their intention was to reduce India to a status of a mere exporter of important raw material. That was their first motive, कि इंडिया को सिर्फ इसी एक स्टेटस में रिड्यूस कर दो कि वो हमारी इंडस्ट्रीज के लिए रॉ मटेरियल प्रोवाइडर बन जाए. The second motive was that they wanted to reduce India to a sprawling market for the finished goods which were produced in British industries. Now children, it's very important, if an industry has produced something but there is no demand for the product, that industry cannot survive, or that therefore, it was very important for the Britishers that first of all they should have sufficient raw material also, and once the finished good is ready, there has to be a ready market also for buying their goods. Then only their continued expansion could be guaranteed. So you could see how very systematically British government tried to deindustrialize our economy. Now, when we talk about, as I had already mentioned, that Indian handicraft industry enjoyed worldwide reputation, but this was the industry which suffered worst because of British policies, and there was total decline of handicraft industries during British rule because of the policies. Now children, some reasons, causes can be attributed to this. Now obviously when they were actually exporting raw material to British industries, to so obviously there will be shortage of raw material for handicraft industries as well. Another thing, now since they were importing British goods which were machine made, so our handicraft industries, items or products which they were manufacturing, they could not stand the competition faced by finished products. Moreover, ultimately, last but not the least, British government did not pursue any policy, any favorable policy which could assure growth of handicraft industry. So in total, this particular type of industry actually suffered. And what was the result? It led to massive unemployment, because children, you know, handicraft industry, they used to absorb lot of employment because most of the manual work was also done there. and because the labor absorption is more in handicraft industries. Now, proceeding further, slow progress of modern industries was there during second half of 19th century. So you could see mainly cotton and jute textile mills only were there. So even modern industry, although it started taking root in India, but its progress was very slow. There was hardly any capital good industries. Tisco was incorporated in 1907. That was the only industry to mention. And there were other few industries, modern industries like sugar, cement, paper, etc., which came up after Second World War. Now, children, uh, next when we talk about the contribution or the growth rate of industrial sector, it was very low, and contribution to GDP was also very less. Another important thing was that limited area of operation of public sector. So public sector was basically or mainly confined to railways, power generation, communication, ports, etc. So that was also what was needed.